This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.
Aloha! Thank you all for coming this evening to the monthly public lecture of the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii. Before we start our usual program, we have a special guest with us.
Thank you. It's an honor for me to say a few words about our special guest this evening. Dr. John McDougall and I have been friends for many years. In 1976, I changed my diet to a plant-based diet. I lost about 35 pounds. I got all these health benefits. My thinking cleared up, my energy went up, and I thought, why isn't any doctor ever telling us that this is possible? In my effort to get into medical school, I met a doctor who was doing exactly that, and that was Dr. John McDougall. Not only was he practicing medicine the way I think all doctors should practice, but he was documenting everything with literature, research, and if you've seen any of his books, he covers everything with science. So I really respect that about him. In fact, after medical school, I went to Harvard to study nutrition, and I found that Dr. McDougall was even ahead of the curve of the things they were teaching us at Harvard School of Nutrition. So with great appreciation, I'd like to welcome a true pioneer in the field. We're very fortunate to call Dr. McDougall one of our own since he did his training here, began his practice here. I'd like to welcome Dr. John McDougall.
And now I'd like to introduce to you another very special person who's here tonight. He is Hawaii State Senator Mike Gabbard. As many of you know, he and his family are dedicated vegetarians, including his daughter Tulsi, whom some of you may have heard of. Just last week, she won a seat in the United States House of Representatives. I'd like now to invite Senator Gabbard to the podium.
Aloha kako. Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to meet one of my heroes after so many years. Actually, it was back in 1988, 5 years after the McDougall Plan was published, that our family started a exclusively vegetarian restaurant called the Natural Deli. It was in the down-to-earth Moilili store. Some of you old-timers may remember that. Back in 2008, we introduced a Senate concurrent resolution. The House and the Senate passed a resolution asking the Department of Education to come up with a meal plan that included vegetarian options. Passed the House, passed the Senate, and we gave it to the Department of Education. Dr. Bill Harris, and some of you in this room were probably there to testify. Bill was introduced to put it into statute to have a vegetarian option for public school lunches. Unfortunately, the Health Committee and the Education Committee chose not to hear that particular bill, so it died. Unless you show up to testify, that's what really works down there. Your testimony, especially in person, if you can, but if you cannot make it in person, by email or by letter, it really makes a difference. The other side, the opponents of this, they showed out in droves, and quite frankly, we were outnumbered. So if you would like to get involved in this very worthwhile cause to provide vegetarian options for our public school kids, then please contact my office. You'll be seeing it in the newspapers most likely. The second issue is GMO labeling. I've introduced a bill for the last 3 years to label GMO whole foods. Unfortunately, the chair of the Agricultural Committee does not agree with the bill, and therefore he has chosen not to hear the bill. Our session starts on January 16th, and so if you would all kindly get involved, we might be able to make a difference on these issues this year. And so now, John, if you'll please come. This is a commendation from the Senate, and I'll just read the last paragraph. The Senate of the State of Hawaii, we hereby honor and commend Dr. John A. McDougall for his many years of service in promoting healthy and healing lifestyles. Your leadership as one of the first traditional physicians in the medical establishment to assert that adoption of a vegetarian diet can reverse heart disease and other illnesses has saved countless lives. Mahalo nui loa for your determination to help people look and feel great while enjoying optimal health for a lifetime. Congratulations.
Thank you, Senator Gabbard and Dr. Terry Shintani. It's now time for our special guest. We're delighted to have back with us tonight an old friend, Dr. John McDougall, MD. Dr. John McDougall is a board-certified internist who is also the author of 12 best-selling books and the widely followed online monthly McDougall newsletter, as well as host of the nationally syndicated television show McDougall MD. He is a highly respected early pioneer in the use of a healthy, low-fat, plant-based vegan diet to help countless people gain or regain their good health. And we are proud to say that he laid the foundation for his life's work right here in Hawaii. First as a plantation doctor on the Big Island, and later as a physician on Oahu. I believe that some of you in the audience this evening may even have been patients of his during that time. He has continued to help uncounted more people through his practice in Santa Rosa, California, and through his many books, including this year's The Starch Solution. His presentation tonight is entitled The Diet Wars. The time for unification is now. Please welcome Dr. John McDougall.
And in the audience is his lovely wife, Mary McDougall, in the back there.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm back, not just back to Hawaii. I turned 65 this year. My dad retired at 65, but I just feel like I'm just getting started. Well, actually, the roots of it began when Mary and I moved here in 1972. Then between 1973 and 1976, I was a plantation doctor on the Big Island, Hawaii at Hamakua Sugar. I worked there for 3 years, and everything I know today, I mean, all the basics I learned during those 3 years. I learned, first of all, that what I did as a doctor didn't work. My patients didn't get well when they had chronic diseases. I took it personal. I thought I was a bad doctor. I gave the best pills in town. I sent them to the best doctors. I even sent them to Stroud Clinic. I sent them to Honolulu to get good care, and they never got better. Not my patients with chronic problems. But I took it personal when I was a plantation doctor. I thought I was a bad doctor, and I'll tell you why. I went to a medical school that didn't have all that high a reputation. It does today. It was Michigan State University. And then, instead of going to Harvard or to University of San Francisco or to LA County Hospital or the other places I applied, Mary and I got married and decided we wanted to have some fun for a year. And I went to Queens Medical Center, which was known as a surfing internship. And I figured I learned nothing there because when I became a plantation doctor, my patients did terrible. They never got better, no matter how many pills I gave them. They never got better. And I knew what a real doctor was supposed to do. I watched Ben Casey, Dr. Kildare, Marcus Welby. I knew what a real doctor was supposed to do. And because my patients didn't get better, I thought it was my fault. So that's one lesson I learned, even though I took it personal. The second lesson I learned was how to eat. And I learned that from my plantation patients. In particular, my first generation Filipinos, Japanese, Chinese, and Koreans that I took care of. 5,000 of them on that plantation for 3 years. My first generation patients who were born in a native land of the Philippines, Korea, Japan, China. These people remained healthy and hardy and hardworking into their 80s and 90s. You folks have seen this. See, I don't have to tell you, you've seen it. And the kids born here in the state, in Hawaii, they learned a different diet. They didn't learn a diet based on starch, like rice. They learned a diet more focused towards balance, a diet of meat and dairy. And what I saw right before my eyes is the second generation get a little fatter and sicker. You can see this. I don't have to tell you. You live right here. The experiment is here. It's almost ready to disappear because all the healthy people are almost gone. All we have is the fat kids and grandkids left. And the grandkids were just as fat and sick as anybody else I'd ever taken care of back in my previous training. So right before my eyes, I knew it wasn't genetics. They were the same genetic strain. I knew it wasn't the work. The plantation work hadn't changed in 100 years. The only thing that changed was the food. They stopped eating the starch, the rice. They stopped eating the rice and the vegetables. They started eating the well-balanced, high-protein, high-calcium American diet. And right before your eyes, they got fat and sick. So anyways, after 3 years of that experience on the plantation, I left, couldn't leave Hawaii. No way, we were absolutely in love with the state. And you know what I mean. So I came back to Honolulu, and fortunately they had the University of Hawaii medical residency program here that replaced Queen's Medical Center's surfing internship. And I joined that residency program, and I became a board-certified internist. Then I practiced for a few years in Kailua, and then we did finally leave the islands after 15 years to move to California. It was a good move, I'll tell you. We've enjoyed being in California, but we come back every year. This early 70s, early 80s, I had some mentors, I had some heroes. You know, Terry Shintani said that I helped him a lot. I did, by the way. I sold him my medical practice in 1986 for $1. I had some mentors. One of my most important mentors was a fellow by the name of Nathan Pritikin. Maybe some of you remember him. Nathan Pritikin was an engineer. He wrote a lot of books. He was a very, very well-known person. He got in a fight with Robert Atkins. Nathan Pritikin, who believed you should eat a starch-based diet, a diet of rice and potatoes and beans and lentils and corn and things like that, with some vegetables and, you know, low-fat dairy you recommended a little bit of, almost no meat. He got in a fight with a guy named Robert Atkins. They were on television shows, they got into arguments, and Robert Atkins got mad when Nathan Pritikin said, "Your diet kills people. It'll give them heart attacks, it kills people." And Robert Atkins fought back with his attorneys and sued Nathan Pritikin. Something else rather historic happened last month. Senator George McGovern died. Senator George McGovern, he was the author, his legacy is the Dietary Goals of the United States. He authored the Dietary Goals of the United States in 1977. I was 30 years old. The Dietary Goals was published with the attitude that this was going to do for America what the Surgeon General's report on smoking and health did in 1964. In the 1970s, half the people smoked. Today, fewer than 20% of adults smoked. We made a great change because government came to the defense of people. They recognized the cause of bad health in this country in terms of cigarette smoking. They filed a report, the Surgeon General's report. We as adults listened to this report, and most people quit. Well, Senator McGovern and a few other brave men and women developed the Dietary Goals of the United States in 1977. And this was supposed to do the same thing for this country or more, but it didn't. Back in the 70s, there was half as much obesity as there today. I mean, only 15% of the people were obese in the 1970s. Today, 30% of the people are obese, and they predict by 2030, 44% of the people in this country will be obese. I'm not saying overweight. 2/3 of the people right now are overweight. I'm saying obese. In fewer than 20 years, they predict 44%, and if you're from Mississippi, it'll be 67% of the people will be obese. There's twice as much type 2 diabetes now as there was in the 70s when George McGovern filed his report. Why? Because the food industry gathered all their money, all their talent, and fought back viciously, and to this date, they've won. But the fight's not over. You know, the truth could triumph. But we have to organize. You know, we all have to recognize who is trying to lead people to better health and who is trying to destroy human health and the planet. Just like clean coal. I mean, if you haven't figured this out yet, then you're not going to get my lecture. Traditional low-carb diets like Atkins, there are all kinds of them out there. The Scarsdale, the Stillman, the Zone, South Beach. The newest one is Dukan. It's the Atkins diet with less fat, more protein, more meat. And then we have the Western Price Foundation with Sally Fallon. Are these names familiar to you? These are the people who have stood up for the meat and dairy industry and told you that eating meat and dairy is good for you. And eating starch is bad. Rice is bad, because rice turns to sugar, which makes people obese, and that's why there are 1.73 billion obese Asians living on rice. Yeah, you may laugh, but that's what they say. Those are the low carbers. Low carb, carbohydrate is starch. When you say fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol, you're talking about meat and dairy. I know these terms may be confusing for many of you. They're confusing out of purpose. The meat and the dairy industry actually force this terminology on our government when they write things like the Dietary Guidelines for America, which came out again last year. 2010 actually came out. The Dietary Guidelines. They come out every 5 years to tell Americans how to eat. Well, the dairy industry insists that you don't tell people they should eat less meat and dairy. They say, tell the public to eat less saturated fat and cholesterol. So they really don't know what we're talking about. So we have these diets that are high in saturated fat and cholesterol. What does that mean? Meat and dairy, right? Low in carbohydrate. What's carbohydrate? Plants. Sugar is plants. Only plants make sugar. No animal makes sugar. You say, well, milk has sugar. That's made by an animal. No, the sugar came from grass. See, only plants make sugar. So if you're talking about a low-carb diet, you're talking about a diet with low amounts of plants. You're talking about a high-fat diet. Generally, we're talking about saturated fat. You're talking about a high-animal food diet. So the ultimate in low-carb, high-protein, high-fat diets are these right here, like Atkins, and Barry Sears, and Sally Fallon, the Western Price Foundation. The new low-carb diets are called Paleo. Yeah? You're following me. Your friends, particularly those who you talk to diet about, the subject of diet, they tell you, oh, no, I eat paleo. I'm on the paleo diet. That's the new low-carb diets. And what this theory is based on, let me just tell you in case those of you are not familiar, paleo is Paleolithic. The idea is that we should eat like our ancestors. But they say that those people who lived 10,000 to 2.5 million years ago, those paleo people, they lived on meat, is what they tell you. Their diet, in fact, they recommend 55% of your diet, the paleo people, 55% of your diet comes from eating animals. So you have the paleo diet, they call it the Paleolithic diet, the primal diet, the caveman diet, the Stone Age diet, the hunter-gatherer diet. I mention to you because if you are going to get involved in this war, you must be able to identify the enemy. And the enemy is low carb, like Atkins. The enemy today, the modern enemy, is paleo, recommending high animal, low-carb foods. All right, so a paleo diet consists of a large amount of meat, poultry, seafood, 55% of the diet. You can eat some fruits, which is good. Non-starchy vegetables, that's good. You know, non-starchy vegetables are like broccoli, cauliflower, asparagus. But they say don't eat starches. Don't eat rice. Don't eat grains. Don't eat wheat. A potato? Good grief, a potato. That's probably the most evil thing in the world. All right, they also say that you shouldn't eat dairy, you shouldn't eat sugar, and you shouldn't eat oils, except for olive oil is what they say. But that's good advice. I would X the olive oil. I don't think you should be eating that either. Here is the ultimate in the paleo diet. This is the Bible for paleo people. It's written by a professor at Colorado State University. His name is Loren Cordain. He's a PhD, and he has written the paleo diet, which all these folks follow. This is what they hold up as the truth, the paleo diet. And by the way, I wrote all about this. If you want to read this whole discussion with the scientific evidence behind it, it's in a newsletter. I think it was in my May 2012 newsletter. It's free online. As I told you, we give basically everything for free. It's free online, and the title of the article is "The Paleo Diet is Uncivilized, Unhealthy, and Untrue." It's untrue. And that newsletter has been out for, 5 months now? And I'm waiting for the challenge. And believe me, it's been well read. All right, Cordain, the author of the Paleo Diet, says the one and only diet that ideally fits our genetic makeup is the Paleo Diet. He says, the author claims that every human being on Earth ate this way for the past 2.5 million years until the dawn of the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, when grains, legumes, and potatoes were introduced worldwide. That's what the author says. There wasn't a single person who did not follow the Paleo Diet, he says. And by the way, the parentheses up there are page numbers if you want to look at the book. I'm not only willing, but I'm actively challenging these people. They're listening, but they're hiding. All right, why did they come to that conclusion that primitive people ate a diet of mostly animal foods? The reason is primitive archaeology, like archaeology done 50, 100, 150 years ago. Primitive archaeologists, they'd go to a village site, they'd dig around the fire pit, and they'd find bones and stone tools and cuts from those stone tools on the bones. They found no orange peels, no corn husks, and so their conclusion is that we were hunter-gatherers with an emphasis on hunting because all they could find was remnants of animals based on crude archaeology. And by the way, this isn't just my statement. This is what archaeologists report, and they report this is the reason for the misunderstanding that the public has. Real archaeologists don't believe this, except for maybe Lauren Cordain. I'd like to introduce you to this. This is a starch granule. Plants synthesize sugar. Remember I told you that no animal makes sugar. What plants do is they take the energy from sunlight and they combine it with water and carbon dioxide and they make sugar. It's a process called photosynthesis. That's how you get all the basic energy for life, is from sunshine. These sugars, which are called glucose, are attached together in chains. These long chains are called amylose or amylopectin, or starch. And then what happens is these long chains of thousands of sugar molecules are put together by the plant in these structures called amyloplasts. In this case, they're oval structures. They're inside the cytoplasm of the plant. And these are the storage granules for starch that are in plants. And the reason plants make these sugars, which they store in the amyloplasts, is for their own use. They need to survive through the winter, so they need energy. And when spring comes, they need to germinate or sprout again to become a new plant. That's why they make these sugars. That's why they make starch. Modern archaeology has the ability to take and detect things that are small rather than things that are big like bones. And so when modern archaeologists look at remains that date back, in this case 2 million years ago, they find plant parts, including starch granules. In Mozambique, East Africa, they found a site of 105,000 years ago, and look what they found at that site. You see those structures? Those are starch grains or starch granules. So people were living on starch-based diets 105,000 years ago. The Neanderthal is the ultimate in the hunter emphasis, right? I mean, we think about the Neanderthal people as being tough, burly, and meat eaters. Well, they looked at Neanderthals all the way from the chilly North Atlantic to the hot, steaming Mediterranean, and they looked at multiple skeletons, and they looked between their teeth. Look what they found. The top row are starch granules from 44,000 years ago, and they also happen to be very similar to the bottom row of starch granules, which are cooked starch granules. So 44,000 years ago, we knew Neanderthals were living on starch. And then this particular paper that was published, these are all from our recent journals, our best scientific journals. When this particular research paper came out in 2011, if you were watching the internet, what it was titled, the article was "The End of the Paleo Diet." Because this excavation was it was actually multiple sites, 3 sites, Russia, Italy, Czechoslovakia. 3 separate sites they found on the tools dating back 30,000 years ago. 3 separate sites, the end of the Paleo Diet. 150 miles south of Santiago, Chile, we were able to find organic material, gross organic material, because this particular site was a peat bog. 14,000 years ago, because organic material was preserved, they found the first evidence of potato eaters. They found 44 different types of edible plants and 22 different types of medicinal plants from 14,000 years ago. Peru, 8,000 years ago, they found 7 skulls of humans, and they looked between their teeth, and look what they found. Well, you know what those are, right? Starch granules. People were starch eaters. Every place you look where there is verifiable human record, what you find is that all large populations of people throughout all of verifiable history have lived on starch-based diets. The bulk of their calories came from starch. You know, for example, that the Aztecs and the Mayans are the people of the corn. And a little further south, the Incas lived on potatoes until they went to battle, and then they switched to quinoa. And the Middle East used to be known as the breadbasket of the world, living on wheat and barley. What did people live on? Rice and sweet potatoes and buckwheat, and all large, successful populations without exception have lived on starch-based diets. And yet you and your friends are told that they shouldn't eat starch, it makes you fat. It's the evil food that causes all the destruction in health in our society, you're told. That's what the paleo people teach. That's what the low-carb gurus teach. But it's contrary to everything we know, and yet your friends sit and listen and say, oh yeah, I don't want to eat potatoes. Potatoes are the worst thing I could eat. It's white. Don't eat white. You know, white potatoes, white rice, cauliflower. Don't eat white. Oh, you say, oh, there's exceptions. There are populations of people who've lived on these paleo kind of diets, like the Eskimos, the Inuit Eskimos. The Inuit Eskimo is a primitive population of people that barely survived on the fringes of the environment. It's a testament to the human being that you could live at that kind of extreme. And their lifespan was short, and their successes are few. They're the number one selling books on the market today are the paleo books. I hope you don't find this an abstract discussion. The paleo people, 55% of their diet is from animal foods. They say, in this book, you should be eating beef and veal and pork and chicken, but you can also eat alligators and snakes and kangaroos and deers, and they even give you addresses to buy wild animals that you can eat. And they do mention that this might be repulsive. Laurent Godet goes on and says those primitive diets also included brains and bone marrow. We should be eating this to be healthy. Now we're getting more repulsive, aren't we? Okay, with the idea we're supposed to eat like our ancestors, let's just carry this one step further, because 80,000 years ago, these are remains from a site in Western Europe. These bones are from children, 8 children's skeletons. The marks you see on the bones are from stone tools. What they practiced was nutritional cannibalism 80,000 years ago. That means they ate people for nutritional reasons, not for religious. So you're supposed to eat like your ancestors. Paleo diets are dangerous. There have been multiple reviews done. This is the most recent one. This is from the British Medical Journal on these low-carb diets. They are dangerous. Consensus opinions. I am not cherry-picking the science for you. The science clearly says if you eat a low-carb, what is carb? Plants. Low-carb, high-protein, high-fat diet. Protein and fat are from, at least the way they term it, is from animal foods. Each and every scientific review that has been done over the last 30 years clearly says these diets will kill you and your family. There's no exception. In fact, when this article came out, the Atkins nutritional people protested the British Medical Journal, and they laughed at them. You protest all you want, folks. This is the truth. In this particular case, they showed an increase, 62% increase in heart disease among people who ate these low-carb diets like the Atkins diet, and this Barry Sears zone diet, and the Sally Fallon type of thinking. All right, so let's go on and talk about some ways that you might figure this out yourself. Have you ever heard of the blue zones? Published in National Geographic about 10 years ago. Very famous book, it's called The Blue Zones by Dan Buettner. What this man did, he worked for National Geographic, he went out and he looked for the longest lived populations of people on this planet. And in Okinawa, Japan, and Sardinia, Italy, in Costa Rica, and the Seventh-day Adventist, and various populations of people, he looked at the longest-lived populations of people and looked for common characteristics. And you know what was common to all these people? They lived on starch-based diets. They weren't vegetarian, no. They lived on high-carb, low animal food diets. Every single one of them, no exceptions. There is no population of people that has a history of longevity that exists today or ever existed in the past that lived on a low-carb, high animal food diet. The most effective diets ever used to treat people have been based upon starch. Like, for example, the rice diet at Duke University. Probably of all my mentors, Walter Kempner was the most important person in my life. I mentioned Nathan Pritikin. Well, Walter Kempner came before him. He's the only doctor I learned about in medical school. He taught the rice diet at Duke University, a diet of rice and fruit, the rice diet. Cured people with congestive heart failure, failing kidneys, rheumatoid arthritis, type 2 diabetes. This is all published in the scientific literature before 1953. There is Roy Swank's work. Roy Swank, by the way, Roy Swank is one. I have all these mentors. They happen to all be men. No gender bias intended. It's just the way it is. They're all men like Nathan Pritikin and Walter Kempner and Roy Swank, Oregon Health and Science University. Roy Swank, who treated multiple sclerosis with diet. I found Roy Swank's work on multiple sclerosis, and what Dr. Swank, who happened to be the head of neurology at Oregon Health and Science University, the medical school in Portland, he'd done work on 5,000 people. Well, he showed that if you take the animal food out of the diet and you feed them starch, carbohydrate, you can stop MS. These paleo diets are an ecologic disaster. I don't know whether you realize this or not, but this planet is in huge trouble. I mentioned clean coal. Animal foods also are a very serious problem. It's one of the biggest stresses on our environment. In November of 2006, the World Health Organization came out with a very important report. It was called Livestock's Long Shadow. It was a 407-page report where they studied the impact of eating livestock. That means animal foods on the environment. And they said that 18% of the global warming gases were produced by livestock production. That's compared to 14% of the greenhouse gases that are produced by all transportation. All airplanes, all cars, all buses, all trains, 14%. Animal food eating is 18%. But that was a conservative publication. World Watch Institute, when they came to their findings, they said that 51% of global warming gases are produced by eating animals. And it's wasteful of water. In this particular report that was just published by the U.S. Geological Survey, it says to make one juicy hamburger costs our environment between 4,000 and 18,000 gallons of water. Here's Lauren Cordain. This is the picture he has on his book, which was published in 2011, on your left. This is a picture of him today after 20 years on the paleo diet. Some of you may be thinking, well, these hunter-gatherers, the reason that these people were healthier is because they exercised a lot. Well, this has been looked at. They've looked at hunter-gatherer populations, in particular, this was just reported in a scientific journal. They looked at hunter-gatherers, the Hadza women or gatherers, this is the Hadza men, they hunt. And what they found is that this is a hunter-gatherer society. They measured their energy expenditure and they found that they exercised no more than the average American. These people are not intensively involved in exercise. The hunter-gatherer isn't. I bring that out because I want you to focus on what the real problem was, which is the food. Nathaniel Dominy, who has become a friend of mine over the last several years, he's at Dartmouth College, very famous professor in archaeology. He's a biologic anthropologist. In other words, he spends his life studying people in terms of a nutritional biologic anthropologist, people in terms of what they used to eat and their health. He studies the teeth, the thickness of the enamel on the teeth, which is thick in human beings so that you can chew on these starches and various vegetables. And he also did some genetic experiments where they looked at the human genome. And they found that the human genes code specifically so that we can eat large amounts of starch. And published it in Nature Genetics in 2007. Very famous work. Even our genetic code shows that we are starch eaters. The ancient physical structure of people and the genetic codes that they discovered in people and so on. And I talked to Nathaniel Dominy during this particular conference.
And so what do we tell our friends and relatives who tell us that we're primarily meat eaters because we're hunter-gatherers? With an emphasis on hunter because that's, the man thing to do, and gathering's the woman thing to do.
That's a myth. Hunters and gatherers, the majority of their calories come from plant foods. Yeah.
So
that's a myth. Hunters and gatherers, the majority of all the calories that any hunting and gathering population gets comes from its plant foods. So that's what's most reliable. Meat is just too unpredictable. You can't rely on it.
So as a summary statement. As an expert anthropologist, you've spent your whole life studying the human diet and its relationship to teeth and bones and chemicals and genes and so on. Your conclusion is the human being is a
starchivore.
Could I use that in my new book?
Okay. Sure.
Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, this is crucial you understand this. You are a starch eater. You are a starchivore. You always have been, you always will be. Until you figure this out, you're not going to be in control. You're not going to be trim and fit and hearty like you should be. You're not going to be satisfied by your diet. You're not going to avoid common human diseases if you think that you're a carnivore. If you get the bulk of your calories from oatmeal, hash brown potatoes, minestrone soup, bean soup, pea soup, if you get your calories at dinner from bean burritos, mushu vegetables over rice, pasta and marinara sauce, then you've got it. You are a starchivore. This is a battle between good and evil. Evil is a diet that makes people sick. This high meat, high dairy diet that we're feeding to Americans has caused an epidemic of obesity, heart disease, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, constipation, indigestion. Need I go on? What I want you to do for just a minute is look at the various diets. Some of these names will be familiar to you, and what I want you to notice between these various programs, commonality, and why we must join on that side and work together against the thoughts that are destroying this planet and human life. We have Neil Bernard. He's been here to speak to you, hasn't he? Neil's a great guy, PCRM. He recommends a vegan diet, particularly concerned about animal rights. Daniel, he's been around for a while. We have the China study with T. Colin Campbell. Has Colin been here yet? Yes. Okay, T. Colin Campbell's been here to talk to you. He's got the China study diet, which is at most 10% of the diet is animal foods. The CHIP program, Hans Deal, has he been here? Hans Deal been here? I'm sure they must have run the CHIP program somewhere here in Hawaii, right? Been run all over the world. Okay, so Hans says eat starches, vegetables, and fruits. Brenda Davis is a dietitian who's going to, Brenda been here? Yes. All right, Brenda's been here. She tells you you should eat some nuts and seeds and whatever. Caldwell Esselstyn been here? Yes. All right, Caldwell's been here. He told you to eat starches, vegetables, and fruits. He tells you don't eat any nuts, seeds, and avocados. That's what he says. That's what distinguishes the Caldwell Esselstyn diet. And his son, Rip Esselstyn, which I just did a TED conference with 3 days ago. Rip, he's got the Engine 2 diet, which is basic starches, vegetables, and fruits. And then you have the Furman diet. The old Furman diet is eat lots of nutrient-dense green and yellow vegetables. And anyway, he's plant food-based diet too. The Hallelujah diet, for those of you who are biblical-based. Yes, the Hallelujah diet, okay. Plant food-based diet. And then you have the Kempner diet, I just talked about that, a rice-based diet. And the macrobiotics have been around since the 1600s. And then my recommendations, which are starches, vegetables, and fruits, and that is that most you're going to eat animal foods on holidays, like eggs are for Easter, candies for Halloween. Yeah, I know. All right. And then there's natural hygiene diet, which has been around for at least 150 years. And then Jeff Novick's our dietitian, and he teaches the diet of starch, vegetable, and fruits, low sodium. Then you have, let's see, the Ornish diet, and then Pam Popper, she's up in Columbus, Ohio, and then the Pritikin diet, and John Robbins. And we have a couple modern versions like the DASH diet and the therapeutic lifestyle diet, which doctors are starting to kind of own up to themselves. Say, well, you know, we don't believe in that vegetarian thing, but we'll go as far as the DASH diet. Pretty similar recommendations. Unfortunately, there has been, up until I published the newsletter called The Diet Wars, it's a time for us to unify. Right now it is. I published that newsletter 3 months ago. It stopped the diet wars. I think so. I've seen that. Because I explained to people, just like I'm trying to explain to you, we cannot fight among ourselves anymore. We can't fight over a stupid nut. And that's what too many of us have been doing. I mean, I've heard many of you come up to me and tell me your own version of eating healthy, and that's fine, whatever you want to do. But just realize that we're all on the same team and who the enemy is. And of course, all this goes back, I think the origin, as far as I know, of this kind of healthy eating was described in the first chapter of Daniel, of the Bible. Oh, I'm sure it goes back thousands of years more than that. But one of the references that you're probably familiar with is the first chapter of Daniel, the Bible, where his men were sick because they were living with the royalty. And Daniel went to the gatekeeper and he says to the gatekeeper, I want to take my men who are eating the king's food and I want to put them on a diet of pulses and water. That's starches. Starches. He wanted to put them on a diet of starches. And in 10 days, they reported in the Bible, you go home and read it tonight for those of you who happen to have a Bible laying around. In 10 days, they reported that those who ate the diet of starches were much healthier and looked much healthier in 10 days than those who continued to eat the royal food. Excuse me, we've known the truth for thousands of years. When you eat like kings and queens, when you eat like pharaohs and priests and priestesses, when you eat like the rich, you get fat and sick. And the common people who lived on starch-based diets were always trim and healthy. We've known that for at least 4,000 years. I know of records going back that far. The difference is that there just used to be a few kings and queens. Today, in this country, in the Western world, thanks to fossil fuel and the Industrial Revolution, almost everybody eats the diet of kings and queens. Why would you expect people who eat food of kings and queens to look other than what kings and queens look like? You know what these people look like. You know about history. It's just we have, a population where 99% of the people, including the people of Hawaii, eat like kings and queens. In fact, you can go back to the Hawaiian history. I used to go to the Waikiki Aquarium, and they had listed in the aquarium that the fish were kapu. They were forbidden for anything but the royalty. It happened here too. All right, so we're in big trouble. I just want to tell you, there is an answer to this. I hope you are of a mind and of an awareness to realize that we've got some problems. Sandy? Wasn't that the name of that storm that was with us about 10 days ago? Do you think that was a sign of problems? Or how about the drought that affected almost 70% of our croplands? Do you think that was just a sporadic thing that happened? But we're facing a very bleak future, and it's happening much faster than anybody ever thought it would. And so we have to make some changes. Lessons come from the past. Directions for the future come from the past. I want to give you an example of when people were required to change their diet because of difficult times. This happened during World War I. The primary opponents in World War I were Britain and Germany. Between 1914 and 1918, World War I, what the British did is they set up a blockade around Germany. What they tried to do was starve the Germans to death. As a consequence of this blockade, Denmark was severely affected. And the people of Denmark were under the same economic and food distress as the rest of Western Europe. Because even though they weren't part of the war, they were still in big trouble. Because of their location, you see, in the North Sea, the British blockade affected the people in Denmark. Now, the people in Germany, they kept with their traditional thoughts about nutrition, that you need some protein, you need to have the calcium foods. They're going to keep the basic eating pattern, and as a consequence of keeping that basic eating pattern, 400,000 Germans starved to death between 1914 and 1918. Now, the people of Denmark, they had a leader who looked at things differently, like the people in the Vegetarian Society here do also. That there's a better way to look at the problem and to solve the problems. And so what happened in Denmark was a whole different story. And it was the consequence of this man, McDougall, medical doctor, nutritionist, born in the 1800s. He was famous then because he did experiments on people in terms of nutrition in Denmark. And he also had great influence on the Danish government. Served as the manager of the Danish Nutrition Laboratory, and he was also the advisor to the Danish government during World War II. Now, Dr. Hindhede had done some experiments in the 1800s. For example, he had raised people, his subjects, on diets like some of you are attempting to do and some of you have successfully done. But he took it to a little greater extreme. He would raise people on single food diets, like Madsen here. This is one of his subjects. See this guy here? Doesn't look too malnourished, does he? He lived for a year and a half on potatoes and found him to be in excellent health. It's one of the earliest references that I've seen of scientific experiments where they raised people on simple foods like a grain or potatoes. They gave him a little bit of oil, too, in the form of margarine. But that's it. That's basically all he ate for a year and a half. Now, when they carried out these experiments in the 1800s and early 1900s, there's one thing that they considered unimportant, they addressed very clearly, and that is that one nutrient we should not worry about is protein. Because the protein needs of a human being are so low that they cannot be reached by any known diet. Our need is so tiny. Yet, of course, what all you hear about, what everybody's talking about, what the paleo people and everybody's telling you about is don't do this because you can't get enough protein. Yet, in the 1800s and 1900s, as all scientific research has shown since then, it's impossible to design a diet that's deficient in protein. You can't do it based upon whole natural foods. It's impossible to do. So they didn't even consider that as a possibility in making a dietary prescription for the Danes during World War I. See, the Danes were under the severe food restriction, just like the Germans, where 400,000 of them died between 1914 and 1918. But Hindhede said, look, we're going to do things different. What we're going to do is, instead of letting our population of 3 million people in Denmark, there are 3 million people then, instead of letting our population in Denmark suffer and starve, What we're going to do is we're going to change what the people of Denmark eat. And so based on his policies, what they did is they stopped feeding the pigs and the cows the food. And as a result, only people who lived on farms and raised pigs ever ate pig between 1914 and 1918. And only the very richest people in Copenhagen ever had a touch of beef in those periods of time. Cow's milk production and dairy food production dramatically was reduced, and said the people ate the wheat and the barley and the potatoes that were otherwise fed to the animals. As a consequence, not a single person, according to his publication in JAMA in 1920s, not a single person suffered from hunger in Denmark during those times. That's what he reported in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Lessons from the past to help us decide what to do in the future. And so, during that period of time, and I want you to notice, these are people of all age groups. These are people like you in their 20s and 40s and 60s and 80s. What happened during that period of time is the death rate dramatically dropped. It dropped by 34% in the times of most severe food restriction. That's the mortality rates in Denmark. They have never before or never since seen such a low mortality rate in Denmark as the period between 1914 and 1918 during World War II, when they stopped eating the animals and instead they ate the animals' food. This is a lesson for us for the future. This happened in multiple occasions, multiple parts of the world. For example, you see the death rate from diabetes in Wales and Britain. You see how the death rate, you see between 1905 and 1915, the death rate from diabetes is increasing in Wales and Britain. And then World War I came along and it plummeted dramatically. And then after World War I, it increased again. Then World War II came along and they had to go through food restriction again. And they had to stop eating the animals. You see what happened? As I mentioned, this has all kinds of implications, including the fact that we can get more food out of our land. There are starving people all over the world. About the fact that these people are hungry in these parts of the world. They live on $1 a day. The families are starving. That's why they're upset. You know, we do know the solution. We do know the truth. Derek Shintani told you I have a passion for the scientific literature. I've been publishing it in my books, my writings for 38 years now. You know, I think too few people have listened. No one's denied the science. But the public is hearing something different, and they're listening to these low-carb people. They're listening to the Atkins people, Gary Taubes, Lauren Cordain, Sally Fallon from Weston Price. They're listening to these people. And there's just no way that I can turn this around that I can think of. I mean, I've tried everything I can. You know, writing the science, telling people what the truth is, showing results at our clinic. We've taken care of 5,000 people. We just published, or we just gathered data. We're about to publish data on 1,700 people. And in 7 days, the average weight loss was 3.5 pounds. That's force-fed. They can eat as much as they want. In 7 days, they lost 0.5 pound a day. They dropped their cholesterol on average 23 points. You can't do that with Lipitor in 7 days. We got almost everybody off blood pressure pills. A collection of 5,000 people, Nathan Pritikin's work, Walter Kempner's work, Roy Swank's work, on and on and on. But somehow they are not listening. And I don't know what to do. But I can get very blunt and very basic. And I'll tell you, I have no limits to what I can do or what I'm willing to do to win this battle. Okay, this happens to be a video that I produced with a fellow named Jeff Nelson. It continues. I mean, a gentleman came up here with a notebook to show me of other examples. Wherever you look, it's always the same. This is the newest low-carb promoter. Yeah, he tells you not to eat sugar. This guy's very big into not eating sugar. Robert Lustig, he's very famous, was on 60 Minutes a few months ago. But he turns around and tells you should eat a low-carb diet. Excuse me, if that's what you look like when you eat a low-carb diet, and then this guy. Come on now, you've been listening to this Santa Claus-looking fella for vitamin pill salesman for how long? You recognize him? So on my website, I'm starting a new feature. It's called the Obese Low Carb Guru of the Month. Now I know there are a lot of fat vegans. Okay, I'm sure there are some of you in the audience who are vegans. And that's a good step. And as a matter of fact, I wrote an article, and there's a chapter in my new book called "The Low-Fat the Fat Vegan." And that newsletter and also the chapter in the book have not offended anybody, even the people who are overweight and are trying to do the right thing. Now, my feeling is I'd like to state here tonight, people who are vegan and are having health problems, you've already declared your interest in doing the right thing. I mean, you're willing to stand up to friends and neighbors and in-laws and tell them you're not gonna eat animals, even if you will become protein and calcium deficient, which is complete nonsense. I mean, you're strong people. You've declared yourself as wanting to do the right thing. You also you're industrious people. You take the trouble to find out where the animals are and to avoid them. This is not easy to do. So, what I've decided to do, excluding the fat vegans, which are people who are well-intentioned but are still eating the soy products and the vegetable oils, the olive oil, and the, what is that, margarine? The healthy margarine. Well, earth balance. Yeah, earth balance. Excluding those people, I would like also, I'm going to put up on my website, I'm going to put up a section called the Obese High Carb Guru. And so far, I haven't been able to find one. But you're welcome to contribute to my website. And I'm sure, just like this gentleman did with his little notebook here, big notebook actually, has showed me many, many other examples of low carb, low plant food, high animal food consumption, obese gurus. I've shown you a dozen of them. I could show you another dozen, and I will in my new feature. Just to be fair, I'm going to put up a feature called the Obese High Carb Guru. And I haven't been able to find any yet. But if you can find some for me, you do it, okay? All right. The new book that I have out, people told me when I wrote this book and I put the title on it, The Starch Solution, they said that was suicide, to call a book Starch. Well, I'm willing to take the chance. I'm a high roller. I called the book The Starch Solution. It may have been a mistake. I don't think so. Because it's so crucial for me to get across that message to you, that you are a starchivore, you are a starch eater. And once you figure that out, everything will work well for you. And we'll get a chance of healing our population, which is very sick. Estimates are 20% of our gross national product goes to health care in this country, and at least 75% of that money goes to treating dietary disease. I don't exaggerate. Once you understand the starch solution, then we'll stop the child abuse that goes on in this country too. This country actively and openly commits child abuse. 30% of the children are fat. Little boys are going through puberty at 9 and 10 years of age. Little girls are going through puberty at 8 and 9 years of age, and they should be going through puberty at 16, 17, and 18 years of age. This is child abuse. Little kids are suffering from terrible acne, arthritis, headaches, constipation, horrible things we're doing to kids. As a matter of fact, if you do those things to children with a stick, and you were the perpetrator, they'd put you in jail. But because we do it with a fork and spoon, and ministers and teachers and policemen do it to their children, it's perfectly acceptable. But the pain is just as severe. This is child abuse that we're committing. In our military, we just went to Pearl Harbor today to take our grandson to see a memorial that I'm sure has touched everybody who's seen that. And everybody who speaks today talks about the dedication and sacrifice that our troops have offered to the American public. But how do we treat our military? Half of our military is overweight. We send our men and women off to battle around the world sick and fat. We have a lot of fixing to do in this country. There's a lot of wrong being done. And there is a simple solution. The problem is the food. And the solution is to switch from getting our calories from animal foods to getting our calories from the traditional diet that all large successful populations of people have consumed throughout all of verifiable human history, and that's a starch-based diet. There's a lot of good that can be done, and it's such a simple answer. And there is a future. The future is ours to create, and if we have the truth, we can do it. And I thank you for the opportunity for me to share this with you, the people that taught me this diet 40 years ago. Thank you very much.
Mahalo, Dr. John McDougall, for coming here to your second home in Hawaii and delivering to us this very important and enormously powerful lecture. And we hope that you and your family enjoy the rest of your stay here. Oh, that's wonderful. We'd like now to invite all of you to enjoy some delicious vegan refreshments courtesy of Down to Earth. Mahalo to all of you for coming, and have a safe return home. Good night, everyone.
This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.